scariest moment in history. Skin hot! Happy Halloween, everybody. You might be looking at me thinking, what are you wearing? That looks ridiculous. It's going for about 5 different things at once. I can't believe it. I've come as modern gaming. That's what I'm dressed as. It's ridiculous. Hence the fact that I stayed into it being as half-assed as possible. Anyway, when we're talking about these single most scary reveals in gaming, I'm going to go with the Metal Gear Solid body corridor from Metal Gear Solid 1. It's the first time. I know it's not a horror game, but at the same time, there was something special about PS1 polygonal horror, and I always thought that the first time you come across the corridor that's full of bodies when you're chasing down Grey Fox, and you don't know what he is. At that point in the story, you've just seen this see-through opaque dude with a sword walking around this area called Shadow Moses that you're trying to explore yourself, and you come across this corridor full of bodies or whatever, and then Solid Snake is all like, oh, they were cut by some type of blade. And it's like, well, what the hell could that be? And I always thought that reveal, especially at the time, PS1 horror was a whole thing, that it was just done extremely well. So I think that visual always stuck with me. And the bit at the end where you finally round the corner and you just see a body held up in midair, suspended by something, and then the reveal that it was Grey Fox, and it all kind of goes from there. Metal Gear Solid 1 was a very, very special thing. And as much as Hideo Kojima wouldn't revisit horror until PT and everything else like that, Metal Gear Solid has some really good horror beats in it. And shout out to the body corridor.
Joe, what's the single scariest reveal in gaming?
Oh, well, it's not anything to do with Resident Evil. It's actually it may not even be from something that's necessarily a horror game. It's like, this is arguably a horror game, and it probably is. But I think that it comes from Bloodborne, right? Because Bloodborne, yeah, it is a horror game, really, isn't it? But it's a very slow reveal, which in fact is something that maybe happens incredibly gradually over the course of the entire game. And this is one of the reasons I loved it so much. Is, you know, when you start Bloodborne, you wake up during this beast outbreak, this nightmare that's going on in the city, you know, whereas you can see all the sort of the peasantry and that, they're all gradually turning into these kind of beast-like forms, gradually getting more and more wolf-like, while at the same time hunting beasts. You know, they're out on a hunt, whilst also transforming into these monsters themselves, because there's this kind of bloodborne corruption going on. But yeah, basically there's this kind of bestial disease going on, and you know, certainly the first few bosses you come across are sort of, you know, Father Gascoigne, who is just, you know, he's another one of these beast hunters who has gone mad himself and transforms basically into a wolf halfway through the fight. You know, he's a werewolf, essentially. You know, some of the other monsters early on are these sort of big, generally bandaged up, plague-ridden wolf-like creatures. It all starts off like that, you know, fairly standard stuff. Very effective, scary stuff, but it's what you'd expect. And then, as you kind of go through, you start gaining insight throughout the game, and things get a bit weirder. And once you get to kind of the Bergenworth area, I think it is where all these scholars have been learning about, again, the old blood and blood ministration. You start thinking, ooh, what's going on? The monsters get they're less werewolfy and bestial, and they're starting to get more kind of alien and sort of slug-like, and they're these strange kind of twisted monstrosities, you know, with heads made entirely out of eyes, and kind of all these tendrils that go into you, and things have got quite abstract. And after that, it just descends further and further and further into this cosmic horror, and you start to see these creatures which you had no idea of earlier on in the game, and apparently they were always there. You know, at times they could snatch you up without you ever being able to see them, and creatures like the amygdala and just some of these nightmarish cosmic things. You know, you end up kind of in the Hunter's Nightmare and the Nightmare of Mensis and everything. It's so much more terrifying than these initial just sort of rampaging beasts from the beginning. They're all these, you know, these creatures are so like off-putting, and as you learn more and more about the origin of the blood ministration, the old blood, and the ancient Tumerians in the labyrinths, and then, you know, the coming of the Great Ones, who are these kind of cosmic monstrosities straight out of Lovecraft. You know, you've gone from Father Gascoigne the werewolf to like Ebrightus, daughter of the cosmos, which is like this. I'll just put an image up, because it is so like terrifyingly scary that underneath something that was already horrifying is just another completely like unknowable layer of scary and terrifying, just blanket horror. And And it really kind of got to me, I think, because it was so slow and so gradual. It's kind of barely perceptible. And then suddenly you're just in that world. And, it was very clever. Si,
Hello.
what's the scariest horror gaming reveal?
So unlike you, I think it is from Resident Evil,
Oh.
but not Resident Evil 2. I'm going to go way more modern with it for a series that's been around for over 25 years. It's had some scares in it. I think the top two, just as a runner-up, is Lisa Trevor. It's the most horrifying story in gaming. But for like a moment, Resident Evil Village and the baby. Of course, it has to show up here. When it came out, that was the thing that other than lead up, everyone was like, "Oh, lady." But also, when the game came out, I was like, "Have you got to the bit with the baby yet?" Because that's something else entirely. Coming off the back of Resident Evil 7, soft reboot, back to horror. It's a scary game. Nobody quite expected what Village was going to do. Maybe it's going to head more in an action route, which it did. But after the initial scares and you sort of get into grips with it, you're like, okay, this is the more action version of Resident Evil 7. And then sort of the third area of the game was like, right, anyway, we're going to take all your equipment away from you. Here's a mannequin of your wife. It's like a puzzle box you have to figure out. And it just gets progressively weirder. And then you hear this baby crying. And then you're like, okay, that's slightly scary. And you go around the dark corridor, and there it is. This giant fetus, huge bulbous head comes at you. You can't defend yourself. Immediately, you just have to turn tail and run from it. And yeah, it just kites you around this area where you have to hide under a bed at one point where it stamps around the room, screaming for Dada and stuff. It's horrific. I know so many people that are like were expecting parents or new parents that would just like mess them up. And I don't like kids as it is, and I played that part. I think the day it came out, I got to around that section at about midnight. I was like, I'm going to stop. Just apropos of nothing, I didn't know it was coming. I'm going to stop, and I played that bit in broad daylight the next morning, and I was still like, I hate this. Everything about this, I hate it. And then on top of that, how do you follow that area back up in the DLC? And they still managed to produce something amazing and scary with the mannequins that follow you in the sort of like Boo from Super Mario way, where if you're not looking, then suddenly they go do behind you. You turn around, it's right in your face. So good job on them for actually following it up with something just as scary. But the baby, 25 years of Resident Evil, and then they come up with the scariest thing. 25 years into the series, so good job. Horrifying.
What's the scariest horror reveal ever?
So, the scariest horror reveal ever comes in the scariest game ever made, and that's PT.
Shall we?
Now, it's the biggest tragedy in gaming that this never got fully made, Silent Hills. But yeah, PT, if you haven't played it, it's this whole corridor thing that's looping. You go around and spooky things happen. And as you get like further into it, more like weird stuff like occurs. And there's one bit where you're just walking around, there's some ominous thing on the like radio, maybe there's a phone ringing, and then you come up to this like hallway and there's like a second floor and a balcony. And you think, oh, I'll just have a look up there, let's see what's up there. Because you need to discover what's going on here. And when you look up, you see this like figure, this woman just standing there like menacingly, and it's absolutely terrifying because she's just watching you. And then as you continue the loop, more like things happen. You can go and look in the mirror and she'll appear behind you. I think her name's Lisa, is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
And like you'll see her in the window, and she can actually like come out into the corridor, so you can come face to face with her. And if you don't like run away from her, she'll grab you and it's a big jump scare, and it's like, it's so terrifying. I've never ever been like as frightened playing a game as I have PT. It's obviously Silent Hills. And Kojima, I wish he could have made this game because it would have been incredible. And yeah, Lisa from PT. Look it up if you don't know what it is because it's terrifying. And make sure you do it at night.